What's going on, guys, and welcome to episode 1 of Real World Power BI. As promised, I've got a great episode to start the series, and today we're going to go through how you can create your own Premier League table in Power BI using publicly available data on each game that's taken place this season. We're going to go through how to get hold of this data and import it, create a calculated table, plus we've got a whole bunch of measures and DAX functions to go through. So let's open a new document and let's get started. So as I've mentioned already, in this series I'll be walking you through getting hold of the data as well as the Power BI steps. For fixture data in England and across European football, a website that I like to use is footballdata.co.uk. I have no affiliation with this website, I don't know the people who've built it, I've just used it for a few projects and find it to be a great source of football related data. As we'll see, we get a lot of betting data as well as result information, but we won't be using that in this demo today. So let's navigate to odds and results for England, and then under season 2020-2021, click the Premier League hyperlink, and you'll see that this downloads a file named e0.csv, which will be our data source for today. So back in Power BI then, and obviously we want to bring in the file that we've just downloaded. Head to Get Data, and click text/CSV as we're bringing in a CSV file. Pick your E0 file and click Open. We'll see that we get all of the result data we need, but we also get a lot of other columns that we won't be using, as I mentioned earlier. We don't need to bring all of this in, so let's click Transform Data to make some changes. Let's start by choosing the columns that we want to keep and trim a lot of the data that we won't be using. To do this, I like to use the Choose Columns button at the top, which will give us a list of all of the columns in the file. We're only actually interested in 7 of these, so let's untick Select All Columns, then click Date, Time, Home Team, Away Team, FTHG, standing for Full-Time Home Goals, FTAG, standing for full-time away goals, and FTR, standing for full-time result. Then click OK, and all of the other data will be removed from the table. Finally, let's rename our table from E0 to Fixtures, and press Enter. Then click Close and Apply to apply all of the changes that we've just made. Now, if I open the Fixtures table like so, this is great and contains only the data that we need. But I want to create 2 extra calculator columns here to show how many points each team earned from the game. To do this, I'm going to use the switch function in DAX. If you're unfamiliar with the switch function, I have a video on it which I'll link below. Let's click the New Column button, and we'll create a column named Home Points. We'll create a switch on the FTR column in the data. Remember, this was the result of the game. When it's H, that's a home win, so the home points won will be 3. When it's D, that's a draw, so the home points will be 1. And finally, when it's A, that's an away win, so the home points will be 0. Let's close the switch function, hit enter, and this column will be updated for every game. From here, it's now very easy to make the away points column. All we do is we copy the home points column definition, hit New Column, paste this code back in, but let's call it away points, and then we just reverse the points that are awarded. So if it's a home win, that's 0 points to the away team, and if it's an away win, that's 3 points to the away team. Obviously, if it's a draw, it's still 1 point. So now we just hit enter again, and we'll see that the away points column has also been added to the data. And you'll see that these work very well together. You'll see that whenever the home points is 3, the away points is 0, whenever the home points is 0, the away points is 3, and whenever the home points is 1, the away points is 1. So you know that these 2 columns are working perfectly. Because of the nature of our data set, we don't have one specific column that's just team that we can use to build the league table. Therefore, we need to create a calculated table to achieve this. Head to Table Tools at the top and hit New Table to create a new table. We're going to use the values DAX function to achieve this. In a nutshell, values returns every unique value in the column that you pass to it. So let's create a table called teams, and let's make it equal to the values inside either the home team or the away team. Both will give us a new unique list of every team in the league. I'm going to use home team here, so it's just values, fixtures, home team. Let's hit enter, and we now have a new table in our file, which is just a unique list of every team in the league. Just very quickly, we also want to rename this one column here from home team to just team. Over to the model view then, and we need to create some inactive joins between these two tables. The reason for this is, as I say, there's no one column in the fixtures table that defines team. There are two, home team and away team. The reason we make them inactive is the same. We want to create home team related measures in the report, but can't do that if the join is to the away team and vice versa. To create a join, drag the home team column of fixtures to the team column of teams. We'll be given a many to one join, which is correct, but we need to double click this and deselect make this relationship active in this window and click OK. We'll know it's not an active relationship because the line between the two tables is now dotted. After this, we do the same thing again, but between the away team column and team. Again, this will create a solid line, which means that the relationship is active, so we just need to untick that box once again and click OK. And now we have two inactive relationships between our two tables. And that concludes the data modelling part of building a Premier League table. So let's get started with actually creating this league table then, shall we? Let's create a table visualization and drag onto it the team column from the teams table. Let's bring this to the centre and just expand it a little bit as well. Now the first thing we want to do is create a measure for the amount of points that each team has in the league so far. And we need to do this using multiple steps. Now the way I've chosen to do this is to create three different measures to achieve it. A home points measure, an away points measure, and finally an overall points measure. Now let's click new measure to begin creating a new measure, and let's call this home points. Now we want to utilise the home points column that we created earlier, so let's use some home points. However, if we just press enter here, we'll see that every team, if we just add the column to the table, we'll see that every team will have 444 points. This is because there's no join going on between the two tables. So we need to enforce that join to be able to get the correct amount of home points. Firstly, we need to wrap this sum function within calculate. Now, I won't go into huge amounts of detail as to what calculate will do, but in a nutshell, the first argument is the expression that you want to calculate, while the second and onward expressions are filters that you want to apply when creating that calculation. So in this case, we need to add this sum here as our expression, but also then apply a filter which will be the forced join between the two tables. For this, we use relationship. What this will do is activate an inactive join that we've got in the model. In this case, we want to activate that join between home team of fixtures and team of teams. So let's do that. Close both brackets there and press enter. And what we'll now get is a list of all of the teams in the league and all of the home points that each team in that league has received. Now, to create away points, we'll just do what we did earlier. Let's highlight the whole thing, copy it, click new measure again, paste the code back in, but call it away points, call it away points, and we want to do this as a sum of the away points column we created, where the away team column is joined to the team column. And what we'll find if we press enter there as well and add away points to our table, we see that both now have been added and they're both working as they should. From here, we just make a third measure. We'll call it points, and we'll just define that as home points plus away points. If we then add this to the table, we'll see that they're now combined, and we can order the table by the amount of points that each team has. While we're here, we can also take out the home points and away points columns, and also if we head into the roller and go to total, we can take out the totals row from the bottom. This combination of calculate and use relationship is a theme that will be running through this whole table. So what we should really be doing is taking this home points measure and just copying out the code so that we can reuse it multiple times in building this table. Now we want to create a measure for the amount of games that each team has played. So let's click new measure, paste in this code again, and let's call this one home games. And instead of calculating a sum, we just want to calculate a count rows on the fixtures table. What this will do is, as you might guess, count the amount of rows, in this case the amount of fixtures that each team has played when they were the home team. So if we press enter and we add home games, we'll see that there'll be either 16 or 17 and one case of 15, as this season is still going on. Again, we can just copy this code out, hit new measure, create the measure away games where the team is joined on away team, and we'll get the exact same situation. Again, we can now make a third measure called games played, and we can make that equal to home games plus away games. At this point, again, we can take out the home games column from our table and instead add in games played. And in this situation, every team in the league has played either 32 or 33 games, which is correct. Some more columns that we should add to the league table are goals scored, goals conceded, and finally goal difference. For this, let's create a measure again. Let's paste in the code that we took earlier, and let's create the measure for home goals scored. For this, we want to create a sum again, but this time we want to create a sum on the full-time home goals column. We want to also make sure that we're calculating this for when the team is the home team in the fixtures column. Otherwise, we're just calculating the goals conceded instead. We can press enter again to create that column and copy it out, create a new measure, paste it back in, put away goals scored, which will be the amount of away goals in the match for the team where the team is the away team. Finally, and this is a running theme, we can create a measure called goals scored equal to home goals scored plus away goals scored. And we can add this to the league table. Now we can do the same thing all over again, but using goals conceded. So let's put in the home goals scored DAX that we took earlier, and let's call this one home goals conceded. Now, as I alluded to earlier, this is going to be the amount of away goals that were scored in the game. So we take the FTAG column, but we take that where the team was the home team. So if they're the home team, the away team has scored the goals, and therefore the home team has conceded the goals. So let's create that as our measure. Then let's do the same thing again and create this for the away goals conceded. So that will be where the team was the away team, and it will be the amount of home goals that were scored, which will be the amount of away goals that were conceded. Finally, again, we just create the goals conceded measure, which will be home goals conceded plus away goals conceded. And once again, we can add the goals conceded measure to our league table. Finally, we can create goal difference. And this one should be much, much simpler. It's just goal difference equals goals scored minus goals conceded. Let's add that again. And let's just change the order of our table. Let's put the games played at the beginning and the points at the end, just so it looks a little bit more like a regular league table. Now, some of you may think that this is now finished, and you can see why. All of the teams were ordered by the amount of points that they had, and I'm just going to narrow a couple of these columns here, as they don't need to be as wide as they are, so we'll just bring in goals scored, goals conceded, and goal difference. Just make those a little bit more narrow. Let's make the whole thing a little bit more narrow as well. However, we know that in the Premier League, points can be equal between two teams, and therefore it's then viewed by goal difference to determine the tiebreaker. Now, in this situation, it just so happens that Burnley on minus 15 goal difference are above Newcastle and Southampton on goal difference here. However, Newcastle and Southampton obviously also have the same goal difference as well as the same amount of points. And again, in the Premier League, there is another tiebreaker, which is goals scored. And this is where the table falls apart a little bit. You'll see that Southampton have scored 40 goals, yet in this table are below Newcastle, who scored 36. And it's purely by chance that Burnley are now above Newcastle in this table. It could always be the other way around. I believe it's alphabetical to figure it out in the first place, but there's nothing in here to determine whether Burnley should be above Newcastle based on their goal difference. So how do we implement these tiebreakers in Power BI? Well, you may know that in Power BI the rank function doesn't actually take into account any tiebreakers and doesn't give you the option to actually add any. So how do we actually get around this? Well, I've come up with a way that's not particularly elegant, but it does work. Let's create a new measure, and let's call this rank points. Now let's add points as our first measure here. And what I want to do is add a coefficient of the goal difference. By that, what I mean is let's add the goal difference, but then let's also divide that goal difference by 1,000. We'll put that in some brackets as well. What this means is that the goal difference will impact the amount of points that are in this measure, but only very, very slightly. It won't actually change the amount of points that they have. It will just cause a very small fraction of a point to be either added or taken away. Therefore, two teams who have different amounts of points will still have different amounts of points, but two teams that have the same amount of points but a different goal difference, in this case will have a very, very slightly different value in this measure. And that's enough to separate them and create an actual ranking between them. From here, we also know that the goals scored is a second tiebreaker between the two. So let's also add goals scored. But in this case, we need to make that value even smaller so that it doesn't impact the coefficient of goal difference being added to the measure. For this, I'm just going to pick 1,000,000 to divide the goals scored by. And if we hit enter, and we add this rank points column, measure rather, to the table, we'll see that this is by default set to be 2 decimal places. I'm just going to make that a little bit more than 2 decimal places. Let's make it 6. And we'll see how this is actually affected. So, we see that for Burnley, for example, they have 36 points as a base, but also a minus 15 goal difference. So this measure will take 15 thousandths of a point away from them. And then, because they've scored 30 goals, it will also add 30 millionths of a point to them. You can see that in the actual rank points measure. So 35.985 because 15 thousandths have been taken away, and then 030 because 30 millionths have been added. Note that we could still use this measure. We're not going to, but we could, because this will round up to 36 if we just took the whole number. But also we see that this figure is higher than the rank points that have been allocated to Newcastle. And in turn, the points that have been allocated to Newcastle are ever so slightly higher than the points that Southampton have, because of how we've impacted the amount of points with goals scored. Even though it's just by a small amount, it being by any amount is enough for us to be able to rank by. So, how do we actually rank the teams? Well, we need to create one final measure, which will be the position of each team in the final league table. And let's call this measure position. For this, we need to use the rank x function in DAX that I mentioned earlier. Now we need to add several different columns to this, several different arguments to this. The first will be the table, and for this we need to use the all function and then supply teams as that argument to rank by all of the teams that we have in our data. Next we need to supply an expression, which for us will be just the rank points measure that we've already calculated. We don't need a value, so we'll just leave that blank and just put another comma in. Finally, for order, we need to supply that as descending, so that the team with the most points has a position of 1, while the team with the least points has a position of 20. Finally, we just close that bracket, hit enter, and add this position measure to our data. And we will see that in this case, because we hadn't ordered it before, we'll see that there's a little bit of a jumble here, in that Burnley should be above Southampton, but also Southampton should be above Newcastle. So what we can do is order this table by the position rather than the points that we had before. And we can also take out the rank points measure that we created as well, and put position to be the first column in the league table. And that is a completed Premier League table. You'll see in my other window that I've actually created some custom formatting on a couple of these columns. So on position and team, I've just got that set to be a different colour for where the position is 1 and also where it's between 2 and 4. And finally, to highlight the teams that are at risk of relegation, which are those teams in 18th, 19th and 20th. I've also changed a few bits and pieces around the layout of the table and also added a title as well, just for completeness sake. But I will let you guys do that yourselves. And that's going to be pretty much it for this video. As I've said before, I'd love to get some input from you all. I'd love to get some new ideas over which public data sets we should be using and what sort of dashboards we should be creating. So leave me some feedback in the comments below. Subscribe if you're new and want to see more, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.